Welcome back to Fabulous Creations. I'm Ron, and this is my friend Ryan.
What up?
And today we're gonna make Nutter Butters. You may be familiar with Bon Appetit here on YouTube, where Claire, what's her last name?
I have no idea. It's just Claire.
You may be familiar with Bon Appetit. You may be familiar with Bon Appetit here on YouTube, where Claire, our beloved Claire, makes gourmet versions of things. And one of the things Ryan and I thought that would be cool for Claire to make at some point would be Nutter Butters. And so we thought we'd try it ourselves first.
Yep.
And one of the things that Claire always experiences in her videos is sometimes you need to make jigs or various tools to get the job done. And when you have something like Nutter Butters here, they're a very interesting shape. They're the shape of a peanut. I've never seen a peanut cookie cutter at the store. Have you, Ryan?
It's not at Target.
There's also the design.
Insert ad.
Yes. There's also the design on the top of the Nutter Butters, which I've never seen a stamp for those at Target either, right?
No.
So we thought it'd be fun to make Nutter Butters, and I could make the tools we need to make Nutter Butters. So I made a peanut cookie cutter and a peanut stamp to get the design in the top. So Claire, if you stumbled across this video while searching how to make Nutter Butters on YouTube, know that we got you. We figured out this part of it, and we'd be glad to send them along to the Gourmet Test Kitchen for you to use in your own Nutter Butters. So with that, let's get into making homemade Nutter Butters, Ryan.
Let's do it. Who's eating the cereal?
So the first step on our journey to making homemade Nutter Butters is obviously creating the cookie cutter and the laser etch stamp. If you're a regular subscriber of my channel, that's likely what you're here for, as this isn't a cooking channel. It's just another one of my gazillion and one hobbies in addition to woodworking and laser crafts, and I occasionally find ways to combine the two. To start, I first need to find some reference images of a Nutter Butter so I could get the design just right. I could have just bought some Nutter Butters myself and taken reference photos, but I was already at the shop and wanted to get the stamp etched then and there, so Google Images to the rescue. I found a perfect top-down shot of a Nutter Butter, which is exactly what I was looking for. I took that photo into Adobe Illustrator, my design tool of choice, and got to tracing. I placed my reference image on its own layer, and then locked that layer so I wouldn't accidentally move it or interact with it. I also made that layer a template, which tells Illustrator to dim the image so it's less distracting. Using the pen tool, I then started drawing the horizontal lines that made up the peanut's ridges. These are all curved lines, so if you know how to draw with Bezier handles, you'll be in good shape for something like this. Without going into a full Illustrator tutorial, you basically want to place your points anywhere that the line starts to change directions, but click and drag to pull out the handles until your curve matches the profile you're going for. My drawing defaulted to add a fill and no stroke to the path, so after I got done drawing it, I hit enter or escape to finish the path, and then changed it to have a thick black stroke and no fill. I also added rounded end caps to the stroke and tweaked it a bit until I was happy. After that, I could have repeated the same steps for each horizontal line, but I realized all the lines were pretty similar in this direction and that I could probably just duplicate my first line and tweak it to fit the profile of the other lines, and that's exactly what I ended up doing. After getting all the horizontal lines done, it was time to do the vertical ones. These would end up being the same thickness as the horizontal ones, but I decided to draw them with a slightly thinner stroke so that I could see how well they fit my line a little bit better. These lines were a little different and appeared to have a different number of points, so I did draw these all separately, but it went pretty quick. After they were all drawn and tweaked, I made them the same stroke weight as the horizontal lines and switched my efforts to the outline. Now I could have traced this in the same way as I traced the interior lines, but I noticed that the overall shape looked a lot like two overlapping ovals, so I decided to give that a try first to make it a little more uniform in terms of shape. Sure enough, it looked to be a good fit. The oval on the right side was shifted a little right of center and smaller in width than the oval on the left, but other than that, they were a perfect fit. After using Illustrator's Pathfinder tools to merge the two ovals together, I selected the two corner points in the middle of my peanut using the Direct Select tool, and then used the Corner Radius tool overlay to pull out the corner radius of these 2 points to match my reference image. After my design was drawn true to life, I needed to figure out how big it should be in the real world once I made my stamp and cutter. Much to my chagrin, the Wikipedia page for Nutter Butters made no reference to its real-world scale. Luckily, I found a photo from a food blogger that had done a little back-to-school Nutter Butter recipe where they decorated Nutter Butters to look like rulers. Adorable. Thankfully, that photo had a ruler in the background that I could use to figure out the size in Photoshop. at least close enough for government work. This is actually one of my favorite little-known tricks inside of Photoshop, so I'm excited to show it to you. If you want to measure something in a photo and know the exact dimensions of something else in that photo, you can set your scale in Photoshop to use that reference data for every other measurement you take inside the document. In this case, we have a ruler inside of our photo. Doesn't get much more accurate than that. So I drew out a line from the 0-inch mark to the 3-inch mark, though it could have been any other mark on the ruler. I know that that line is exactly 3 inches in the real world. Photoshop's internal measurement scale measured this distance to be 240.09 pixels. Cool. I'll round that down to 240. We'll use that in the next step. Now, it had been a while since I did this, so I couldn't find it in the menus by itself, but I remembered the command was something like set measurement scale, so I searched that in the help menu and it came right up. Looks like it now exists in the analysis submenu, which I guess makes sense. In the associated dialog, I entered that 240 number for the pixel length. In the next box, I entered 3 for the logical length, as that's how many inches I had measured on the ruler. I could have entered inches for the logical unit label too, but that doesn't really change anything internally and it's just a label. I knew I was talking inches, so I skipped that. After hitting OK, I could now take any measurement I wanted with my new scale applied. Measuring tip to tip, it looked like the Nutter Butters in the photo were about 3.35 inches wide and 1.58 inches at the widest sections. Taking those measurements into Illustrator, I could now scale my design to size. It turns out my design was massively oversized, 10.5 inches wide. Woof! After changing this width to be 3.3 inches and letting Illustrator scale the height for me proportionally, the height came out to be 1.54 inches, which is pretty darn close to what we had measured in the photo. Works for me. The last step I decided to do before cutting on the laser was to make 2 versions, one positive and one negative. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make a silicone mold out of the wood cutout or just use the wood cutout itself to do the stamping on the cookie dough, so I figured I'd account for both scenarios and etch one version where the interior lines were protrusions and one where they were etched below the surface of the wood. Now for everyone's favorite part, laser etching the design. I wanted to use solid wood for this rather than plywood, since it would likely be coming into contact with food and possibly moisture if I needed to wash it off, which could cause some warpage. Plus, I know that normal Titebond glue is food safe, but I doubt the adhesives that's used in plywood manufacturing share that quality, so I decided to use a solid piece of pine that I had laying around. After the first pass with the laser, I found that the depth of the cut wasn't as deep as I wanted, so I did a second pass directly over top of the first layer. The second pass still wasn't as deep as I wanted, so I did a few more until I got the depth I was looking for. I then performed a perimeter cut to show me where the outline of the peanut should be on both designs. After the lasering was done and this laser etch board sat around in my garage for a few weeks, I decided to cut out the one with the etched ridges and use it as is without any silicone casting. Now in past videos of mine, I've gone on about how most lasers can cut pine like butter, so don't ask me why I didn't cut this out on the laser when I first etched it. I must have been burning some midnight oil and not thinking clearly. Oh well, the bandsaw made quick enough work of it, along with a little sanding over on the belt sander. With the stamp taken care of, I could turn my sights to making a cookie cutter. I found a product on Amazon that was quite literally made for people who want to make their own cookie cutters. It's basically a narrow strip of super thin stainless steel, but what makes this perfect for cookie cutters compared to normal stainless steel strapping is that one edge is folded over to make it less sharp, since you'll be using these with your bare hand to press cookies out. With that, I needed to figure out at what length to cut the stainless steel to have enough for my cookie cutter with a little bit of overlap, but also not waste much. Said another way, I needed to find the circumference length of my peanut. Now my high school geometry is a little foggy, but I don't recall there being a formula for that. Luckily, Illustrator has a method of finding this. But like the Photoshop measuring trick from earlier, it's hidden away in a menu and they don't make it super easy even once you do find it. So, after hopping back into my design file, I pulled up the document info panel from the window menu and selected my path. Here, Illustrator told me that the length of my path was 591.174 pixels. Now, despite my document settings being set to inches, this figure reports in pixels for whatever reason. But no worries. Illustrator will convert dimensions entered in 1 unit to your document's set units when transforming. So what I did to convert this pixel length to something I could actually use in inches was draw a random square, doesn't matter what size, and then in the transform menu, change its width to that same 591.174 pixels and hit enter. Illustrator behind the scenes calculated this to be 8.2182 inches and performed the transformation for the square. So that is the exact perimeter of my peanut. I figured I'd want an inch of overlap on the cookie cutter, so with that and a little bit of rounding, I decided to cut my metal strip to 9.25 inches using a pair of small wire snips. Using a metal file, I cleaned up that cut edge a little bit as to not be as sharp. Now you'll remember that I cut both a positive and negative impression of the Nutter Butter pattern. Even though I decided to use the negative to do the stamping directly on the cookies, the positive version came in handy here to help form the metal into the correct shape. I placed the metal banding inside the perimeter of the cut peanut shape and then bent slowly as to follow the path all the way around. Once I got it bent all the way around, I made a small mark on the outside where the edge of the overlap would end up. Now this cookie cutter banding came with some 3M double-sided tape to adhere the overlapping portions of your cookie cutter together, but I thought it might be nice to make this a bit more of a permanent bond than just adhesive tape could provide. So I decided to try my hand at using JB Weld, which is a type of two-part epoxy specifically intended to bond metal to metal without hot welding. It's probably not food safe, but being this would literally be sandwiched in between the metal and have limited food contact, I figured it was fine. So I roughed up both surfaces with a little sandpaper to give the epoxy a little more to hold on to, and then mixed up a bit of each part of the epoxy with a wooden skewer. After applying it to one side and adhering the overlapping piece, I put a clamp on it to hold it together for the duration of the epoxy cure time. Unfortunately, my clamp was on the larger side, so I wasn't really able to clamp on both sides of the peanut. This resulted in losing that inner curve on that side of the peanut as the clamp really flattened it out. Not fretting, I cleaned up the squeezed out epoxy using a large sewing needle and my pliers and gave it a good cleaning. Now that it was one solid piece, I was able to do some final shaping. Using a few different sized wooden dowel lengths, I rolled, massaged, and tweaked the imperfect bends of my cutter to be a little less imperfect. I also eventually got my inner curve back on the clamp side of the cutter by gently pressing it against the smaller diameter dowel. This was all fine and good, but I couldn't leave well enough alone and was really trying to get that cutter to be as perfect looking as possible when this happened. Unfortunately, all my fiddling with the shape after the epoxy had cured had caused it to break and release its hold. I did end up cleaning the old epoxy off and repairing it, but I also decided to start anew and make a new cutter. This time, instead of forming it using the perimeter of the positive, I decided to use it as a rough guide and just do the bends manually using the dowels again to assist me. I also decided to use painter's tape to mask and hold the cutter together once the JB Weld was applied, so I didn't flatten my curve again. Overall, this worked much better, though I did still have some gaps from not having the tape wound as tightly as I could have. What I didn't like about this cutter though was that the peanut shape was a little too perfect and symmetrical, where the OG cutter was precisely tuned to the shape of my designed peanut. I would have done a third cutter combining the pros from both methods, but I already had way too many hours into this peanut cookie cutter and I was questioning my sanity. The first cutter was repaired after all and could still be used. It just was a little wobbly around the perimeter from so much fiddling and it was scratched up from all my sanding and scuffing on the metal. So it was a little ugly, but could still do the job. So let's move on, shall we? With the cutter and the stamps both made, let's hop back to the kitchen with Ryan and make those Nutter Butters. We recorded so much footage while making these, of course having fun pretending we were in the Bon Appetit test kitchen. We did all the things Claire normally does, including reading off the ingredients, dissecting the original and weighing it, researching some starting point recipes. It could be a whole video on its own. But after an entire Saturday afternoon making a mess in the kitchen, we had some passable Nutter Butter replicas and we're ready to call it a wrap. So, there you go. The cookies turned out better than we expected.
Yeah, a little bit bigger.
They're a little chonkers. They're a little bit, they're like mega-sized Nutter Butters, but when it comes to peanut butter cookies, is that really a bad thing?
Not at all. So, all in all, not too bad.
Except for, the kitchen being a
complete
disaster.
Yeah.
But that's every time I cook, so
right?
Yellow.
It's okay.
So, I know this was also a little bit different than the normal type of video I do, but I hope you enjoyed it. I love to cook in addition to the woodworking and laser stuff, so finding ways to combine them is also a really fun challenge and exercise in my creativity, I guess. So, yeah, I'm sure there will be another one at some point where we're like,
what's next?
What can we make in the kitchen next that needs laser to make to make a mold for? So, thanks a lot for watching, and until next time, cheers.
That's a wrap.